Today we have a super exciting topic on urbanization and green infrastructure, which will be taught by my dear friend and colleague from New York City, Igor Bronz. He is an engineer and green technology expert who works for Gaia Technologists in New York and also New York City Urban Institute, where we worked together as well in the past. He graduated from University of Pennsylvania with a Master of Science degree in Applied Sciences and Hydrology, and he also received Bachelor of Science from Brooklyn College Earth and Environmental Sciences, where we used to be undergraduate students together.
There are many definitions out there, but the definition I prefer is basically saying that you're providing the ingredients, you're introducing ingredients into an environment in order for you to be able to build with nature. And by building with nature, we're basically saying we're trying to create a scaffold around the urban environment so that we can integrate vegetation into it. So basically placing vegetation into your walls, your streets, and onto your roofs, and even into coastlines. For example, putting in mussel beds or oyster reefs. But before I get into any of that, it would be a disservice if I were to teach you about green infrastructure without telling you about water first. Because whether you're in New York, where there's a lot of water, or New Orleans, where there's a lot of water, or in Los Angeles, where there's not a lot of water, the water still plays the most critical role in whether your green infrastructure will be effective and how you're going to even design the whole system on a city scale. So I'm going to start with water first, and hopefully we'll have a lot of speak about the green infrastructure itself. So where does water come from? It comes from the mountains, really. You have your mountains. When a rain cloud or any sort of cloud approaches the mountains, it can't go through the mountains, so it has to rise above it. As it rises, it cools. As it cools, it can't hold as much water inside of it. So you get rainfall on the mountains. The rain flows into rivers due to the slope, and then the rivers flow into lakes. And the picture on the right shows you how we use water and from where. So there's water, surface water, rivers and lakes, and groundwater being water that's stored in aquifers, which are porous rock formations that you can that are under pressure, so you can put a well inside of them and get water out. So the New York water system relies on two main watersheds: the Catskill Delaware watershed north of the city, which is here at the bottom, and the Croton watershed, which is the older watershed. It's kind of polluted and dried up at this point, but we're still getting something out of it. And you're getting 1.3 billion gallons a day. That's how much water you get. New York City gets from the watersheds and the reservoirs that are inside in them. So just remember that number: 1.3 billion gallons per day. It's going to become important. So these are what the reservoirs look like. There's 9 of them. They're fairly big. It's basically just a man-made lake. So the water comes from the reservoirs and into the aqueducts. Our aqueducts don't look like the ones in this image. These are Roman aqueducts. So this technology isn't new. And aqueducts are basically the way you get running water in cities. So here's a quote from a Roman historian saying, "An expensive yet necessary luxury to which all could and did aspire." Aqueducts look more like this nowadays. They're just basically just water tunnels. They so the Delaware Aqueduct gives you supplies 600 million gallons a day. So this is the Delaware Aqueduct. It's the world's longest tunnel at 85 miles long and 13 and a half feet wide. So probably 2 or 3 of you can fit like a head inside of it. And then we have the Catskill Aqueduct, which is older, smaller, but still supplies 450 million gallons. And then you have the New Croton Aqueduct, which is the oldest one. You can see the walls are made of stone and brick. It's not quite as advanced as the Delaware one, and it's on and off. Sometimes it supplies water, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the state of the Croton watershed. Once the water goes from the reservoir through the aqueduct, it arrives in the Bronx and in Westchester, which are just north of which is just the northern parts of the city, into either of these two facilities. If it's coming from the Catskill watershed, it gets disinfected with ultraviolet radiation, and then it passes on. That's all that happens, because the water is fairly clean out here, fortunately. So it doesn't have to be filtered or anything. There's no sediments in there. There's really no organics in there. All you need to do is just disinfect it with with some radiation to kill whatever bacteria there are, and then it moves on. And this facility can handle 2.2 billion gallons a day. So it's not always function. It's not functioning at full capacity because it doesn't need to, because we only have 1.3 billion gallons, right? And then there's the Croton watershed, which is the Croton water treatment plant located underneath this field, and that treats water from the Croton watershed, which is more polluted and it needs more intensive treatment. And then the water goes through water tunnels throughout the city. They're fairly large, 20 feet in diameter, and from the water tunnels it connects to the water mains, which is basically the water system which connects to fire hydrants, it connects to buildings, and that eventually connects to your faucet. And this thing here is a TBM. It's a tunnel boring machine. So this is what's used to actually dig these tunnels. You can see it's a fairly large, complicated machine. It's fairly expensive to operate. It has to be assembled on site in a giant. So you dig a giant pit and then you assemble it inside there. And this head spins. With it, deposits slurry into the wall. It sucks out the pulverized rock and slurry through the holes in the front, sends it to the back, and then the back portion applies a tunnel concrete casing, is what you see here. So it does everything all at once. Pretty nifty thing. Costs about $1 billion to even start these things up. In other places that don't have as much water as New York, you have either desalination, which is in mostly in the Arabian Peninsula. It's expensive as hell, but they need to do this because they drain all of their aquifers. They have some very poor groundwater usage policies that resulted in them having basically no groundwater remaining. But that's a topic for another day. And then you have groundwater, which is about a third of all freshwater usage. This is mostly in areas in the Midwest, and most groundwater is actually most groundwater that's used is used for agriculture. You basically just pump water out of an aquifer underneath it. And this is just the major U.S. aquifers. You don't have to memorize this map. Don't worry, you won't be tested on it. So you've seen the Sani before, right? This is basically just water from the New York watershed. It's from New York and New Jersey. It's tap water. So they take the tap water, they do something called reverse osmosis, which means they just evaporate it, and then they recondense it and apply some extra minerals to it to make it taste a certain way, so that it's so the product could be homogenized throughout the whole industry. But this is tap water. So we get 1.3 billion gallons a day into New York City, which means we must get 1.3 billion gallons out of New York City. And that's basically just sanitary sewage, so whatever goes in the toilet, gray water, whatever goes in the shower, sink, the washing machine, dishwasher, air conditioning, condensate, etc. And then stormwater. But the stormwater actually, the 1.3 billion gallons is split between the sewage and the gray water. The stormwater is something extra. We're going to get into that. And we're going to really see the need for green infrastructure once we think about the stormwater and what that's doing to our system. So in New York, you have a combined sewer, which means the sewage, essentially black water and gray water, goes in the same pipe as the stormwater does. Some cities have a separate sewer where the stormwater goes in a different pipe, and that's but New York has a combined sewer in most cities in the U.S. Once it enters the sewer, it goes into the wastewater treatment facility, which just essentially filters the water. This is we don't really have the time to go through this illustration, but the water comes out fairly clean at the end. And then once the water comes out of the wastewater treatment facility, it's basically dumped into the ocean, which is fine, because the water is fairly clean. This is just some images out of wastewater treatment facility. We won't go through this either, but this is kind of what they look like. So let's do some math, and people are allergic to this thing, but we have to think about scale. What are we getting in? What are we getting out? Because that's the basis for why we even need green infrastructure, right? So you have your this is New York City is 302 square miles, or about 8.45 billion square feet. So if you were just to put 1 inch of water over that over this large area, you're going to get 5.25 billion gallons of water, right? 1 inch of rain, that's not a heavy rainstorm. It's like a mild rain. So just 1 inch produces this much water, 5.25 billion gallons. So 80% of that is going to go into the sewer system, because most cities are impermeable. There's concrete, there's asphalt, there's brick, there's whatever. But most of that stuff doesn't absorb water. It just goes in. It just flows off of it down the storm drain. So 80% of that goes into the sewage system, which is 4.2 billion gallons goes in. But New York City's wastewater treatment capacity, so the amount of water that could possibly even enter this system, that's only 1.8 billion gallons. So when you subtract the 1.3 billion gallons that's already used normally every single day, you're only left with 5.5 million gallons of capacity that's left to treat this excess stormwater, right? But there's 4.2 billion gallons of it remaining. So what are you going to do? What happens to the other 3.7 billion gallons? It's going to have to go in the ocean, right? But we talked about the combined sewer, right? We talked about the fact that this water goes into the it mixes with the sewage in the combined sewer system, and you get essentially what happens when you mix 3.7 billion gallons of relatively clean stormwater with another 1.3 billion gallons of basically shit. Like it's basically you're still gonna get shit water, right? So this water is and when the sewer system overloads, when the wastewater treatment plants can't treat all that water coming in, then they just dump it in the ocean. Really, it goes into the water bodies, because where else is it supposed to go, right? Either it overflows into your streets or goes in the ocean, but there's just not enough capacity to treat it. So so that's just one major problem with cities. There's not enough capacity to treat all the water rolling off the impermeable surfaces. Normally, it would go in the ground. If this was a rural area, the water would just get absorbed into the ground or go in the river, and that's it. But in New York, it has to go into the sewer. And every year, there's about 20 billion gallons of CSO, which means combined sewage discharge, which is this nasty stuff coming through, which is just sewage mixed with stormwater. So that's just one issue. Now we're getting into the urban heat island effect, right? Another issue that we need to solve with green infrastructure. So people tell you, I'm sure many of you have heard of, cities are just real hot during the summer because of all the asphalt and concrete. Well, you were kind of lied to. It's not about the asphalt and the concrete. It's about the lack of vegetation. The asphalt and concrete, they absorb more heat than most other things. But really, any landscape, every landscape is made up of stone, if not for vegetation, right? If you go to a desert, it's all sand and granite and whatever other stone there. So clearly, it must not be the material of the city. It must be lack of vegetation that's causing higher temperatures, because vegetation produces cool air. It doesn't heat up as much on the surface as stone or concrete or asphalt do, but also it produces cool air through the process of evapotranspiration. And you're going to see that later in the presentation, exactly how it does that, right? So the main driver for urban heat island effect is that cities are just they don't have enough trees, they don't have enough plants covering every surface of it, which is kind of what you need if you want to control temperatures, right? And cities you can see by this chart, they get much hotter during than the rural landscape, and they stay hot. Like even when it gets cooler in the evening, the city is still around the same temperature, 91 degrees, because all the buildings and roads are radiating the heat back at you. So there's urban heat island effect. Then there's air pollution, right? You have lots of cars. You don't have a lot of plants that are capturing that air pollution. Because think about plants; they act as a filter. They have a lot of surface area. When the wind carries air pollution and it goes past the tree, that tree captures a lot of that the air pollution, because it has so many leaves on it. It traps it. Well, you can see by this map, unexpectedly, Manhattan has the highest air pollution because it has the most cars and the most buildings, and the lowest air circulation because everything gets trapped, between the buildings. And then, so that's just because of low air cycling, lots of cars, low amounts of vegetation, right? And then some parts of the city also have high air pollution because they're very industrial areas, like parts of the Bronx right here. Like here's Hunts Point, which is one of the biggest industrial areas in the U.S. So yeah, that's what happens. You don't have enough plants. then there's the issue of basically like the fact that we don't even know how to recycle any of our concrete and demolition waste, right? When we build buildings, you have to dig out a site. You have to wreck whatever else is on it, and put so you can put something new there. So when you dredge out a site so you can build a foundation, you have to get you're getting a bunch of sand, soil, stone, concrete, asphalt, whatever you have to do to clean out to prepare a site for new construction. You're going to generate a lot of waste. So during normal times before COVID, when everything was online, the city was producing 16,500 tons, not pounds, tons of construction and demolition waste each day, right? That's 12 million tons of waste each year. That's just most of that stuff is recyclable. So because of complexities in this system, which I'm not going to go into, a lot of the waste ends up being unrecycled. So stuff like stone and sand, that's fairly recyclable. Other stuff like concrete, asphalt, brick, plastics, styrofoam, that stuff isn't that easily recyclable. So once, because it's not well sorted and we don't really know what to do with it, we ship it out to, we process it here where the red dots are in the city, and then we ship it out to these places. Many of them are in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and can you imagine what it costs to move that much tonnage of waste, how much carbon that's going to produce? That's not a small expense, and it's something that could be utilized, and you'll see how a little later. So this is my colleague Paul Mankiewicz. We make something called Gaia soil, which is made out of recycled styrofoam. I'm not here trying to pitch any product. I'm just showing you how you can essentially take styrofoam, which people say is completely unrecyclable, and turn it into something useful. And here's how it works. We have a green roof up in the city. This green roof is the same, is half of it is Gaia soil, half of it is another type of soil that's used on roofs, and you can see the difference. So it works pretty well, and it's made out of like mostly styrofoam. It's 95% styrofoam, so it works well. So let's get into green infrastructure. Now that you've had that little bit of background, let me see how I am with time. Okay, I'm doing okay. So plants, right? We want more plants. They take up oxygen, CO2. They produce oxygen. They cool the air. They reduce air pollution. They provide habitats for bees and other pollinators, and they obviously grow food. And what do they need? They need water. Remember what we talked about stormwater, how much of that we have. So there's your water right there. They need substrate. Well, we just talked about how much material we have in excess, like from the construction demolition waste. They need sunlight, that's free, and they need a small amount of care. Obviously you don't want them to overgrow, so the people have to be employed to maintain, plants. They need compost usually. So, but that could be obtained from the food waste system, of which there is also a lot of. I'll just tell you that plants, when you have multiple layers of leaves, the leaves on top, they shade the rest of the plant, and those boil off water, while the plants underneath it produce cool air through the process of evapotranspiration. So essentially turning basically photosynthesis, which takes up water from the soil and uses it, right? And let's just show you. So this is something called Schlerin photography, and it's a type of photographical method. It's existed for quite some time, and it can basically show you air movement based on the density of the air, right? So here you go. This is a leaf. What's going from underneath the leaf this is cool air, and it's cool air because it's sinking, because cool air is denser than warm air. So any air that sinks, that's automatically telling you that's cold air, at least cold relative to the rest of the environment around it. And the air that's rising, that's warm air because it's rising. So this is just showing you exactly how plants are producing cool air in real time, right? Here's a fir tree. Look at all that cool air coming off of it because it has water in the soil, so it's evapotranspiring and producing all this cool air. And then let's look at other plants. This is a plant that's boiling off hot air. You can tell it's hot air because it's rising. So this is a plant that doesn't have as much water and not to it. So, but the one benefit of all this is that even though it may not be producing cool air in this situation because there's not enough water, it's still staying a lot cooler on the surface than, for example, concrete or asphalt would. So this is one of the roofs we've built. It's called Linda Tool. It's because it's on top of the Linda Tool factory, and you can quantify this fairly easily. So I'm going to bring this term up right here: leaf area index over 3. That basically means that the plant's total leaf surface area is 3 times higher than the plant's footprint. Right? If you've ever heard of floor area ratio in buildings, this is basically the same thing for plants. Right? So what this means is the vegetation is dense. You don't have a little bit of grass at the bottom. You have a good amount of vegetation stacked on top of each other, and that's what you want. To really help the environment. So to really get that output. So a quarter inch of evapotranspiration. So imagine a quarter inch of rainfall. That's nothing. Over 224 square feet, that produces 1 ton of air conditioning. So a ton of air conditioning is enough air conditioning to cool an area that's 400 square feet, so about the size of a small studio, down to the dew point, which means that, so the dew point is, sorry, not the dew point, the wet bulb temperature. I'm really getting the terms confused. I'm speaking so fast. So the wet bulb temperature is essentially, it's similar to the dew point, but if you have an 90-degree day, the plants will cool that to 80 degrees. That's a simpler way to understand that. So it'll use 1/4 inch of rainfall to cool that area to cool a small area to 80 degrees from 90 degrees using 1 ton of air conditioning. Oh, so I forgot to mention. So this is like in relative terms, this whole green roof, 12,000 square feet, it cools this dark rectangle by to ambient temperature, so from 90 to 80, and the larger area will cool 2 to 3 degrees because the air is going to blow, the cooler is going to blow off the roof and hopefully cool the rest of it too, right? And it has this shape because the wind tends to go west to east. So how plants clean the air? Very simple, acts like a filter. So in cities, you have something called PM 2.5. So PM refers to the particulate matter. 2.5 refers to the particle size. So 5 microns. So there's PM 2.5, there's PM 10. PM 10 is what happens when you inhale PM 10. You get like this, that's usually like smoke. You get this like kind of like nasty like brown phlegm after inhaling that. Like you'll cough it up. 2.5 is smaller. So what happens when you inhale PM 2.5 is that you don't cough it up. It goes through your lung membrane and into your lungs. And PM 2.5 contains stuff like lead, mercury, other heavy metals. It's not good. This is what causes people's lungs to get all dark and like hardened and everything if they live in cities their entire lives. And if you're like me who also smokes, then you're probably then your lungs are probably even more messed up. Plants capture this stuff. It comes from car exhaust, factories, just other types of industrial activity. And if you have a lot of vegetation in the city, the plant, the air carrying this particulate matter, it passes through the plant, deposits on the leaves, and then when it rains or when there's dew in the morning, it washes off the particulate matter into the drain, so it doesn't harm you anymore because it only harms you if it's floating around. If it's deposited, it's not a problem. So plants supplied with water can solve most of the city's ecological issues. We've just seen how they can use up the stormwater, which we have way too much of. They can cool the air with the urban heat island effect. To construct the plants, you have to use basically the waste stream, the recycled sand, the recycled rock, all of that stuff. And finally, they clean up air pollution. So, what could be better, right? How we definitely need more vegetation, right? Well, how do we put it in? That's the question. This equation is irrelevant. I only use this equation to kind of paint as a metaphor. So this is called Bernoulli's equation. It basically is a relationship between the different diameters of pipes. So what I want you to get from this equation is that changing the input changes the output in a balanced way, right? So if you decrease one thing here, you have to increase something here to balance the equation, right? Because it's just so for example, water in a more narrow in a wider pipe would be moving faster if the pipe narrows, right? So why am I telling you this? Well, a city is kind of like a Bernoulli's equation. There's inputs and there's outputs. If you have an input of air pollution, you get an output of poor health outcomes, damage to people's lungs. That increases healthcare costs, increases reliance on public services. That kills people. So changing the input will result in a better output, and everything can function like an equation because everything can be quantified. So how much air pollution do you have? How many deaths is that causing? How much air pollution will some number of plants remove? How many lives will that save? Everything can be quantified. Everything. So imagine a Bernoulli's equation for a whole city, but instead of there being three variables on each side, there are 50. Right? It's complicated. You have when you have millions of people in one place, you have billions of individual transactions, individual actions that are influencing how this equation will be solved, right? So here we have a photo. I mean, it's a Photoshop, but this image of this is from the cover of a book called The Manhattan, basically showing you what the city of Manhattan, what the borough of Manhattan looked like before it was settled. And so you have your vegetation here. You have your totally industrialized, totally developed city. And there's something I noticed here that just is really, I see a lot of potential in this image to describe exactly why green infrastructure would bring the city's environmental benchmarks back to these levels. That's the fact that this part of the city is really tall, right? So you have your trees here, and this is to scale. So this is how small the trees are compared to the buildings. Just look at all the surface area. If you were to put vegetation on 25% of the surface area of the new surface area that we've created through our buildings, basically onto our walls, onto our roofs, onto our coastline, onto the streets in between, you can have more vegetation in this part of the city than you have in this part of the city, just because there's so much more surface here to even cover. And we'll see how. Here are the metrics on how much surface area we have. So 34 square miles of roof space, 3,000 square miles of vertical space, and so on. And I actually made this image showing you what the difference between if we had 50% green coverage, so 50% surfaces covered, what the temperature would be like. So you have so the Central Parks are controlled. If it's 50%, you have 82. It's almost as cool as Central Park, which is basically at the fully at the ambient. And this would take up 7.7 million gallons of stormwater in this one area. 25%, you're at 86. 15%, you're at 89. And at 0%, you're at 92. So it's 12 degrees hotter in will be hotter right here in the city in a fully non-green area compared to Central Park, right? And this is built by through green roofs. So the image on top is a roof called Sarah Green. It's located in Philadelphia on 30th Street and Walnut. And this is a green roof on top of a parking garage. I used to spend a lot of time there because it was near campus for me. So I would just go up there, have lunch, do some work maybe. It actually looks like this. This is not a fake, this is not like a Photoshop image from some video game. It actually looks exactly like this image. And I'm just looking at this roof and thinking, man, it looks pretty, but from an ecological standpoint, it sucks. You know why? Look at this. Look at all this area. This is lawn. You have these wide paths. The only dense vegetation that you're getting is from these planters over here. So in terms of actually being effective, this isn't doing much. This is basically just a marketing piece. It's pretty. Is it good? Does it do good things for the environment? Sure. Um, is it optimized for the environment? Not really. Not nowhere near. And plus, it was expensive as hell. I used to work with a guy. He was my thesis advisor, and um, he used to be the water commissioner for the whole city of Philadelphia. So he knew about this stuff. And one of the things I asked him was, how much did this roof cost? And give me the real answer. Or give me the answer that the roof's engineers told me it was. Because the roof's engineers, they said it was $2.4 million for the whole thing. I said bullshit. That's not. It's way more than that. And so I had him pull the records for much they filed for to the city, which is going to be the real cost, $11 million. It doesn't have to be that much, because the roof my colleague built on the tool, which was almost as big as this one, was built for $350,000. So we're talking 11 million versus 350K. And this is an important topic because you want to maximize how much roof you can build. So if everything's going to be so expensive that very few people can afford it or want to afford it, or just even want to pay for it, then you're not going to get much done. And therefore, you're not going to get much good out of it. So roofs are great because they insulate the roof of your building. Because I don't know if you're aware, how many of you have ever worked on a roof before, but if you have, the first thing you'll notice on a sunny day is that it's burning hot. Like some of these asphalt roofs, they can, like the tar roofs, they can get to 175 on the surface. They'll melt your sneaker. If it's a really hot day. And then you have this is the actual roof itself. Let me check the time. This is the actual roof itself, and then you want to keep your room temperature at 68. So imagine you go from 175 to 68. That's a lot. That's a big temperature difference. So it really wants to warm you up. And so your air conditioner has to basically try to fight back 85,600 BTU of that. That's the energy that the air conditioner has to produce per hour to keep your room at 68 degrees. If you're on the top floor and your roof is 175, and R is that's basically just the insulation rating. So the higher the R, the better. Now let's go to a green roof. How does this work? So you put 6 inches of topsoil on a green roof, usually. That has an R of 3.6, but this part isn't even that significant. The biggest significance here is that the temperature, because it's vegetation, because it's covered, it goes from 92, it goes from 175 to 92. But even then, it's even lower than that because it's vegetation is also producing cool air. So really, you're getting more like 85, like 82 to 85 at the base level of the roof. So you're starting off much lower than here, and therefore your conditioner has to work only about like a sixth as hard, right? So the insulation ability of vegetation is not something that it's not small. It's if it brings every surface down from 175 to 92, and that's not even that's a conservative measure. Like it could be more, it could be a bigger difference. Then you're going to have to spend a lot less money on energy. Okay, that was the next one. And this is just kind of comparing how on the like if you set the temperature at 103 on a very hot day, you're looking at this is trying to show you the difference that the big role that tall plants play, right? So if you have short grass on a roof, you're not producing as much cool air, and you're not putting as much layers between the heat and the roof deck. So you could go from 103 to 90. But if you have taller plants like this one, and you have way more plants that are being shaded by the tall plants. You have way more plants that are being shaded by the tall plants. So they're evapotranspiring more, and your final temperature to be 80 at the roof deck instead of 103 at the plant surface. So you go from so taller plants will bring you from 90 to 80. And that's basically why you want green roofs, right? You want they're important for the insulation factor. And there's green walls, which look nice. They do a great job, and honestly, green walls are the future just because we have so much vertical surface to cover. So remember, I said there was 32 square miles of roof space and 3,000 square miles of vertical space. So That's 2 orders of magnitude more. So there's a lot more potential there. The problem with green walls is that they're much harder to design because it's easy to make water flow along a horizontal plane like a roof. It's much harder to keep water flow consistent when gravity's trying to pull it all the way to the bottom because you have to water all the plants, not just the ones at the bottom, right? So they're expensive usually because these are very sophisticated designs. Most of them are expensive. Most of them are unreliable. They'll burn a hole through your wallet. And honestly, there's a lot of room for these to be better. So we're actually working on creating a newer design that would eliminate the cost and it'll eliminate like most of the costs for the walls and eliminate most of the headaches as far as like maintenance goes. Plus, you have to be careful about your building facade, right? If it's heavy enough, it can and it's not supported properly, it can start pulling off the bricks off your building and falling off, and you don't want that. Big liability there. Have rain gardens. I'm sure you've seen these in parking lots. They're very useful there. So essentially, they're designed to take up all the water from an impermeable surface such as a parking lot. Right, all the water flows in here. The garden looks relatively small, but really it's pretty deep, and it's designed to store all this water so it doesn't go down the drain. And also to filter, also to clean the water. That's just a cross section of it. There is a pipe at the bottom in case it overflows. You want to make sure that it doesn't flood because if it floods, it'll start eroding the soil. So in case of really heavy rainfall, these things do get overwhelmed, but they're great for 99% of situations. And then you have coastal green infrastructure, and it doesn't look like vegetation really, but this picture is from the Building Oyster Project. It's a group in the city in New York that essentially is trying to rebuild oyster habitats, and they do this by getting oyster shells, putting them in something called gabions, which are basically just these like steel like mesh boxes, and putting them down at the bottom of the river with to basically create an oyster reef, so that living oysters can then go onto that reef, attach to it, and essentially reproduce and become a colony. And oysters are great. Like I just recently read a story about these aren't oysters, by the way. These are mussels that I'm going to be talking about. But there are these things called tiger mussels in the Great Lakes, and they're highly invasive. Like these mussels are not from the Great Lakes region, but they were brought over there, and they start reproducing like crazy. And right now they number in the trillions. There's trillions of tiger mussels in Lake Erie. And would you believe that the mussels in Lake Erie, because they're filter feeders, they filter the entire water volume of Lake Erie in 3 days. So every 3 days, all the water you see in Lake Erie has passed through a mussel every 3 days. Granted, there are trillions of these things, and what results is that the water is a lot cleaner now. That's not necessarily a good thing because a lot of the life there was kind of more adapted to living in more brackish, water, and dirtier water. But now the mussels are cleaning the lake so much you can basically see like 30 feet down, like 30 feet more than you used to be able to see if you're looking down into the water. Like it's actually like amazing what filter feeders are capable of if you have them. So remember that those 20 billion gallons a year of combined sewage overflow that's flowing into the rivers. Well, now you can filter some of that if you actually have oyster reefs there. They don't mind the CSO. It actually makes them feel good. There's a lot of organic matter there. Gives them energy. So I did this. Anything can be turned into green infrastructure. I made this rendering. Ignore this text. It was for a website, but I made this rendering of the Bruckner underpass, which is located in the Bronx in Hunts Point. And I took this photo and then I drew all over it. And this photo is essentially, this is your typical urban underpass. It's not very inviting, This is the area you want to stay away from at night. I had to Photoshop a lot of the trash out of this image when I was doing this. I actually had to remove it, but this is not a great area to be in normally. And typically underpasses in cities, they separate neighborhoods. They say, you live on the wrong side of the tracks. Well, you live on the wrong side of the underpass. It's like that's how it is. Underpasses are not inviting places, and they separate people. And also, this underpass is in Hunts Point. So Hunts Point, as I mentioned earlier, is the biggest industrial center on the East Coast. So this specific stretch right here, it sees about 12,000 trucks a day. I was standing here for about 10 minutes trying to get a picture of it without being blocked by a 53-foot trailer. So this took me a while to even get this. And I'm thinking, okay, what can be done with this? You can put green walls on these pillars and these plinths. You can put green walls on them. And the way you would do that is by putting down a trellis that looks kind of like a wire net and allowing ivy to grow. So ivy, if any of you have ever seen an ivy wall, you can see that it can grow pretty high without even without much help. You don't need to put any trellises for it to climb your wall. But if you do put trellises, it will climb even higher and more densely. So it will grow inside these things called floating wetlands. Something we also designed, which they're above grade wetlands. They use Jersey barriers, so basically your traffic, like concrete traffic barriers on the outside, to create like an area where you can then take up stormwater from the top of the road. So if you look closely at this image, you'll see right here where my mouse is, you'll see these drainage pipes. Right, they take water from the road and they bring it down onto the underpass level, and then it goes down a storm drain. So instead of it going the storm drain, we cut this off like higher, and it goes into the floating wetland where it's stored. It's stored and used because these wetlands have a lot of capacity to take up water. They can take up basically 99% of storm water that comes in, and that water is used up by the plants and by the ivy that's growing on the walls. So this whole area is going to be cooled. Is going to be it's going to take up all the stormwater from here, and it's going to capture all the air pollution. Because think about how much wind these trucks pull with them. I'm sure you've had a truck drive by you, and it feels like there's a whole like wind tunnel behind it. So they're releasing a lot of pollution, and they're pulling a lot of wind with them. But that wind is actually good because as the wind passes through all the vegetation, the air pollution is captured. There's no more PM 2.5 coming out of it. It'll probably capture like 80-90% of the air pollution. And of course, you have your benches, you have your planters here for more ivy. I don't really like these monolithic designs, so I kind of curve this outwards so you can make more of a bike path. That's just a matter of personal taste. But my point is that does this look better? So you can turn virtually any like industrial surface like this, which isn't really much use for anybody except for cars, into something that both cars and people can use. And then and then you can actually connect neighborhoods instead of making people like be afraid to pass this area at night. Which is true. If you ever went to Hunts Point, you see people running across because the train station is on this side, like on the north side of this, and if you live in Hunts Point, you have to walk across this area. So at night, I've seen people just running across it like as fast as they can. So this is just one application, and so you're creating new real estate. Now you can have a food truck here. Now you can have, people can do business here. People can play sports here between these pillars. Like there's space. You can even have a handball court because these pillars are pretty wide, believe it or not. So yeah, what opportunities are there for the infrastructure? How are we going to pay for this? That's a big question, right? Because it's all going to cost money. But you can grow stuff on it. You can so I'm going to go through some of the hard like cost savings. You save money in electricity, you save money in stormwater, you get tax abatements. Tax abatements depend on where you are in the country because that's more of a local thing. But the energy savings and the stormwater capture, which will reduce your water bill, that's basically consistent everywhere. That's the savings that go into your pocket if you own the green infrastructure that's on your building. Obviously, there's environmental benefits that save money for the city. And honestly, if you're doing something to save the city money, the city should return the favor and give you a tax abatement. Isn't that right? Why there has to be some sort of if they want something done, there has to be some sort of recourse. Um, so you get everywhere you build green infrastructure, pretty much going to get some sort of tax abatement because you're helping the city by reducing the temperature, by reducing the stormwater, and all that stuff is going to cost the city money to work on anyway. So you're saving that money too. But then there's the whole idea of marketing, right? Like, wouldn't you want to go to a bar that has a rooftop that looks like this or like this? Wouldn't you want to have a community space there? What about you can grow food there? If this draws people in, this draws vendors in, right? People might want to put a food truck there or a bar or use it as a venue for something. So it also the limits to how much this will benefit you are basically limitless, because if you're creative and you decide to purchase a green room, you can market that however you like and honestly get your money back on it fairly quickly. So we just have to reimagine how we use these types of spaces, because right now this space does no good as it is. But looking to on the right, I see a lot more opportunities such as these, right? Maybe people will go take like Instagram photos there and purchase an $8 bubble tea or something in the meantime. So then there's the issue of what suboptimal infrastructure. We've discussed that. We've touched on that momentarily. So the top is the East River Park rendering. This is done by the New York City Department of Design and Construction, and this is what it looks like. This is just I didn't doctor this image. This is what the park looks like, and most people think, oh wow, that's so cool. Look at all this new space that they have. And when I look at it, I think of, wow, this is a shame, because it could have looked like this, like the bottom image. And what really upset me about this is that when I was looking through their RFP, their proposal, I saw that they included this area right here. This is called an embayment. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Okay, there we are. This is called an embayment. And the reason they put this in is to connect people to nature, right? And I'm like, where the hell do you see nature? I just see a bunch of rocks and water. I don't really see nature. There's nothing living here. So I thought this was kind of a slap in the face, as far as like connecting people to nature. Because if you really want to connect people to nature, you can turn these rocks, you can extend them out a bit more for starters, and you can turn them into a mussel bed. Because this is a tidal area, this is a river, so the water level fluctuates. That's why you have this much height over here. It's for water level fluctuations and for sea level rise. So as it fluctuates, you can have a tidal, tidal life forms here. You can have you can have grasses, you can have mussels, you can actually be connected to nature, and this would actually clean the water. And we've talked about how effective mussels are cleaning. And then they just have this one embayment. They have like another one further down the line somewhere, which if you've ever done any sort of urban like construction, if you've ever worked with the city, you know how hard it is to get to sign off on a new design, right? So this is already spec'd out, which means it's already in the specification, which means that it's something that they've already agreed to design. So they're not building anything new. You're not swooping in to some meeting and saying, "Hey guys, listen up! I got a great idea. Check this out." And then you show them something completely different that they've already, they have no idea what that even is, and they're already halfway done with the project, and they don't want to accept any new designs. No, this already exists. If you just copy what they did here, further down the line, in fact, copied in the whole freaking coastline, you can then put a whole reef around this area, which means you get acres and acres of mussel bed, which cleans tens of billions of gallons of water each day for free. You don't have to pay these mussels; they do it for free, and so it wouldn't even cost much more. This is what I mean by greenwashing. Like you have people look at this project, they think, "Oh, this is green." Yeah, I mean, I guess you see the color green on it, but you don't see This is all lawn. Lawn doesn't do anything for the environment. And plus it pollutes the environment because you have to put on a ton of pesticides and other chemicals to even keep this lawn healthy. And then you have a few measly trees. Okay, great. We have some trees. Lots of paved surface and an embayment that allegedly connects people to nature, connects them to something. So this is an example of greenwashing because you can have this, and I didn't even go through the trees yet. All I did was Photoshop the coastline. This is for educational purposes. So if any of you ever worked for NYC DDC, don't get mad at me. I'm just speaking the truth. So this is basically the difference between good and bad, as far as green infrastructure goes, and don't get it twisted. So here we go.